The Lord be with you. I'm Dr. Mark Peters. I'm professor of music at Trinity Christian College in Palos Heights, Illinois, and a member at Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church in Oak Lawn. It's my privilege to bring you this month's cantata preview for the Bach Cantata Vespers of Grace Lutheran Church in River Forest on Bach's Cantata 32, Liebster Jesu, Mein Verlangen. The liturgical context for this cantata is the first Sunday of Epiphany. And this Sunday, as you might well realize, that we're hearing this cantata is not the first Sunday after Epiphany. We've had that already. It's the second Sunday of Lent. So what's happening with that? We know of Grace's and of Michael Costello's close attention to the liturgical year and to linking the Bach cantatas with the church year. And that's a challenge every year when we get to the Lenten season, because Bach did not write many cantatas at all for Lent. Lent in Leipzig during Bach's time was a time when no concerted music was allowed. That is, the kind of music that we have in cantatas, a more elaborate music for voices and instruments together, which meant that cantatas were not performed in the church service during Lent, and that Bach simply did not compose them during his time in Leipzig. Hardly any cantatas again survive from Bach for the Lenten season, which means that Michael Costello and Grace need to get creative each year when we get to this time period and for cantata vespers that fall during Lent. So a consideration this year is that we are just out of the Epiphany season, so it certainly makes sense to go back to the Epiphany season, that season right before Lent. This cantata also has themes of the Christian soul searching after Jesus and entering into a relationship with Jesus, so themes we also see in the Lenten journey. But this month it also connects us back to the cantata for this month also connects us back to last month's cantata, for those of us who experienced that. Last month's cantata was Cantata 82, composed for the Feast of Mary's Purification on February 2. And there's a close connection between the Gospel readings for the day for that cantata and for the cantata this month. Last month from Luke 1 records Jesus' first visit to the temple, when Mary and Joseph presented him after the custom of the law when he was 40 days old. This month from Luke 2 tells the story of Jesus' next recorded visit to the temple at the age of 12. The gospel for the day is Luke 2, verses 41 through 52. The text tells us that Jesus' parents went up to Jerusalem for the Passover this year as they did every year, and that the 12-year-old Jesus came with them. But it's after the festival of the Passover that the story really takes place, when Mary and Joseph realized a day into their journey home that Jesus wasn't with them, traveling in a crowd of family of others from the region from which they came, and each thinking that Jesus was with the other. And if you can imagine their consternation as they came to realize, where's Jesus? Stop joking, I thought he was with you. No, he's not with me, I thought he was with you. And coming to realize that Jesus was not traveling with them. In fear, in anxiety, they rushed back to Jerusalem. And then the gospel tells us it was 3 days later, so 4 days total, that they had this loss of their 12-year-old son. They find him then. I wanted to note here also, it's that anxiety, that searching after Jesus, where our cantata for today begins, as the Christian soul is yearning for Jesus when Jesus appears to be missing, and begins, "Dearest Jesus, my desire, tell me, where do I find you?" The gospel story continues. Mary and Joseph do find Jesus in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. We can hear Mary's mixture of relief and annoyance in her question, "How could you do this to us? We've been frantically looking for you." I have to admit, as a parent, I'm unsatisfied with how Jesus' tone comes across in the gospel. Essentially, what's the big deal? I was here the whole time. But more important is Jesus' identification with his heavenly Father and with the work God was calling him to do. No doubt the nature of these conversations he was having in the temple. Jesus did, however, then take up his role and responsibility as a human son, going home with his parents, being obedient to them, and as the gospel tells us, increasing in wisdom and years and in divine and human favor. The text for Cantata 32 is closely based on the gospel reading, but in rich poetic language in which Mary and Joseph are conflated with the believing soul, and the boy Jesus and the resurrected Savior are one. Cantata 32 is one of a relatively small number of cantatas for which we know who wrote the text. So most of Bach's cantatas, we don't know who wrote the actual text. Most are anonymous. But this text was written by Georg Christian Lehms, the court poet and librarian at Darmstadt, who you see pictured here. Lehms is best known today for his lexicon of female poets, Deutschlands galante Poetinnen, Germany's gallant female poets. He also wrote novels, opera librettos, and occasional poems, as well as 4 yearly cycles of church cantatas for the Darmstadt court. Lehms published his first cycle of cantatas in 1711, and this was actually a double cycle, with one cantata included for the morning worship service on Sundays and feast days, and one for the afternoon Vespers service. And we see here the title page for that collection, the Gottgefälliges Kirchenopfer, the offerings pleasing to God, based on the church year. Bach clearly had access to this book. Perhaps he owned it himself. He set 2 cantatas from it in Weimar and 8 more in Leipzig. Interestingly, Cantata 32, our cantata for today, is one of 6 cantatas Bach composed from this volume over the course of about 1 month, from the second day of Christmas in 1725 to the second Sunday after Epiphany in 1726. So this, our cantata for today, Cantata 32, again written for the first Sunday after Epiphany in 1726, Bach's 3rd year in Leipzig. As I indicated, this text grows closely from the gospel for the day, beginning with Mary and Joseph searching for Jesus, but it translates that into the human soul, the Christian believer searching for Jesus. We don't even need to wonder about this or try to figure it out, because Lehms tells us this right in the cantata's text. He clearly labels this cantata as a dialogue between Jesus and the soul, and you can see here in the circled portions, the first larger circle identifying the 2 characters in the dialogue as Jesus and Seele, Jesus and the soul, and then subsequently with S and J labeling the different parts in the dialogue, and the cantata continues in that way as this dialogue between the soul and Jesus. So while many, I would say most even, of Bach's cantatas are about the relationship between the believing soul and Jesus, this one is even more intimate than most, presented as a dialogue between the 2, which begins with the 2 lovers separated and ends in a joyous union between the soul and Jesus. The cantata opens with a sad love song, a yearning for the absent beloved. You've heard songs like that before, right? I'm thinking Bill Withers myself. In the blank with countless other songs like this. The lover is gone and the singer is yearning for that person's presence, yearning for that reconnection and return. That's the mood of the beginning of this cantata. So Lames takes that anxiety and fear felt by Mary and Joseph and translates it to the Christian soul who feels like Jesus has gone away from them. It's a song of love, of sorrow, of yearning, of fear, of desire, and Bach pours all of that into the music. Which means that the cantata doesn't begin, as we've come to expect, with a grand movement for choir and instrumental ensemble. It begins with a slow, intimate movement in which the believing soul is represented by a soprano soloist in gorgeous dialogue with the solo oboe. And here we note another feature of the cantata. Bach musically represents the text's dialogue by assigning each character, the soul and Jesus, to a particular singer, the soprano for the soul and the bass for Jesus. These were common associations in Baroque music. This is not unique to Bach. So the cantata plays out dramatically between the soprano and the bass singers, again, the soprano representing the soul and the bass Jesus. We'll listen now to the opening of the first movement, in which we can hear not only the mood Bach sets with the music, but also the beautiful and virtuosic interchange between the soprano and oboe. We're listening here to the Netherlands Bach Society's All of Bach project. Of course, we'll look forward to hearing this from Grace as well. I find the response in the next movement to be jarring, both textually and musically. After this long and plaintive aria, the movement to recitative is short and simple, quoting the words of the 12-year-old Jesus in the Gospel almost directly. "Why is it that you looked for me? Don't you know that I must be about my Father's business?" And the music is likewise brief in a simple recitative declaimed by the bass soloist. That leads into the movement 3, though, bass aria, Hier ist mein Vaters Stätte, which Bach composes in a stately minuet style, perhaps for this dance's associations with the court, because movements 2 and 3 make it clear where Jesus is to be found, that is, in his Father's house, about his Father's business. The believing soul need not worry or fear about finding Jesus. In seeking out Jesus in his Father's house, the soul binds her heart with the heart of Jesus. What begins as jarring in movement 2 becomes an intimate representation of the union between the soul and Jesus. And we'll listen now to movement 2 and into the beginning of movement 3.
Was ist, dass du mich gesuchet? Weißt du nicht, dass ich sein muss in dem das meines Vaters ist. In meines Vaters Stätte, in meines Vaters Stätte, findet mich ein betrübter Geist. In meines Vaters Stätte, findet mich ein betrübter Geist.
So far we've heard from the soul in movement 2, and we've heard from Jesus then in movement 2, and then here in the movement 3 aria. The dialogue gets closer now and more intimate in movement 4. In movement 4, we have now an exchange between the two voices in the movement itself, with shifting musical styles to highlight the different sections of the recitative. It's a fascinating movement in which the soul and Jesus are in direct dialogue with each other. And it culminates then after this commitment of the soul and Jesus to each other, with which the movement opens. I don't have that text here, but it culminates with these words that we recognize as the opening verses of Psalm 84. You may recognize from the Brahms Requiem. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord, mighty Sabaoth. So this idea from the previous movement of Jesus saying, it's here in this place in my Father's house where I am to be found. And the soul is committing to that then, to finding Jesus, to embracing Jesus in the context of worship, in the context of the Eucharist, by implication as well. And ending in this passionate declaration, Jesus, my breast loves just you forever. We'll listen to that opening text and into these lyrics of Psalm 84.
Wirst du den Erdentand verfluchen und nur in diese Wohnung gehen, so kannst du hier und dort bestehen.
The union is then celebrated in the movement 5 aria, in which the two voices now join together in a joyful duet celebrating the love of Jesus and the soul. Here we get the happy ending that leaves behind all the fear and doubt of the cantata's opening. The text begins with the soul and Jesus in duet singing the same words. Now do vanish all afflictions, now do vanish sighs and pain. They continue with the soul pledging, now I shall not abandon you, and Jesus replying, and I too shall always embrace you. We'll hear just the opening of that movement.
Nun verschwinden alle Blagen. Nun verschwindet auch und Schmerz. Auch und Schmerz. Verschwindet auch und Schmerz.
Interestingly, this is where Lames's poem ends, with this joyously fulfilled union of the soul and Jesus. But this is not where Bach's cantata ends. It has an additional hymn stanza, this chorale. For Bach and his Lutheran contemporaries, the hymn, the chorale, represents the congregation, even if it wasn't being sung by the congregation. By adding a hymn stanza to Lames's poetry, Bach moves the union beyond an individual relationship between the soul and Jesus, bringing the love and commitment of the soul and Jesus to the congregation, to the whole people of God. You can see that this particular hymn stanza encapsulates so many of the cantata's themes, a longing for the house of God and for the presence of Jesus, and the soul's love for and union with Jesus. It also links back to the first movement by naming and rejecting the doubt and fear with which the cantata began. I pray that in your experience of Cantata 32 within the context of Vespers at Grace Lutheran Church this Sunday, you are likewise drawn into the deep love of the triune God, that perfect love that casts out fear.